just like I told you that I highly advise getting to know your brushes, what they can do, getting to know the shapes, what you can do with what they can do, all these things, right? Same goes with your paints and your colours. Now, because, look, what I should say is anybody who told you make sure you wash your brushes, it's true. They're right. Make sure you wash your brushes because it's only you that has to come back and find it all hard like this, you know. Stupid me, I should know by now. But if you don't wash your brush, it's not nice, and it's only you that has to come back to use the brush that's all set in paint. Same goes as keep your area nice and clean. And the other thing is put your lids back on your paints tightly because eventually it will dry up. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a hack. Remember how I was talking to you about paints and the composition? So there's three kind of paints we're going to talk about mostly. We're going to talk about acrylic paint, which has the pigment, water, and also a kind of a glue binder, which is kind of like PVA equivalent. The other two is my personal favourite, gouache and watercolour. These two don't have that PVA gluey kind of thing. Taking the acrylic out of the picture and looking at these two, because they don't have that glue in them, in theory and in practice too, even if you haven't put your lid back on, like I haven't on this beautiful coloured turquoise gouache, because there's no glue binder, I can re-wet this paint, even if it's all dried up. I can just add water and I can still reactivate the beautiful pigment. Just so you know. So if you have a gouache or a watercolour and it has dried up, you could always just access it by adding water. But this is, I'm telling you this not only because if you've not put your lids back on, but I'm telling you this so you understand a little bit more about the makeup of the paint, because it makes a difference in how you can use the paint. Now, I've put this gouache. Gouache, I like gouache because gouache seems to, I just like the way it has a lot of character. The colour has a lot of punch. Watercolour is like the opposite extreme in that it's very kind of delicate. Gouache is like this kind of nice world between the two. It has a little bit more, goes a little bit more of the distance than watercolour does. Whereas acrylic, yeah, it's okay, but it's got that glue thing in it. It's a bit kind of glassy and a bit kind of, I don't know, you can't get, it's always a bit transparent. But don't get me wrong, heaps of my work is done in acrylic and there's always use for it. But when you want a bit of colour and a bit of opaque colour or opaque sort of coverage, sometimes you need something more than just plain old acrylic by itself. So now let's talk about paint. So this tiny little tube of yellow. This is an expensive tube of paint. I'm not quite sure how much I paid for it. It's a watercolour and it's called a Series 1A. Now, series in paints means pretty much how much pigment is in there and the quality of the pigment. Because if you get an expensive tube of paint like this yellow, it's going to go so much further. The colour, there's so much pigment in there that it just has more quality, right? But it's not, doesn't mean that this is all you use. But that's why one tube of paint, like this tiny tube of paint that I've had for years, right, that keeps going, because it's such a high quality of pigment. So it just goes and goes and goes because there's a higher concentration of whatever it is that makes it yellow. Also, the pigments, some are more expensive than others, like the tones and the sort of the purity or whatever and the brightness and all that. But from this like little dot of yellow, you know, you see I'm getting a lot of, I'm moving it a long way for such a little soft colour. But this is acrylic. You can instantly see how it's a bit more kind of tacky. You can see how that's way watery. You can see that the ingredients of that paint is basically pigment and water. Whereas this acrylic, this is a pretty nice acrylic. It's got like a gel, like a fatness to it. This isn't doing bad coverage either, don't get me wrong. This is a nice acrylic, but you can just see it's a bit different to that. That's watercolour, that's gouache, and this is acrylic. I'm sorry there was black on my brush to show you the colour, but this is actually done a pretty good job. Look, it's not a bad ratio of pigment to that yellow. But, you know, you'd use a tube of that covering a canvas, whereas you'd probably use 1/10 of a tube of this if you were covering a watercolour painting, just because of the different kinds of texture. Like, get this is kind of harder, like it'll go and then it kind of dries up. See how my brush dries up? You can, of course, dip it, and when there is more pigment, you will be able to stretch it. But when there's less, you add water and it just becomes way too light. And that's like the difference between your different paints. And once again, these are the things that it's really great if you get a feeling for. There's even a place for like really crappy paint. You know, there's a place for it. But what I recommend is understanding what your paints do. Some paints, I mean, and one brand of paint or a kind of acrylic, like a house paint acrylic, is really different to an art shop purchased acrylic. And they'll do different things, but there's some things that are the same. But all I can say and highly recommend is experiment. Now, I just want to draw your attention. I've used a bit of water here. My paper, this is like an old sketchbook. And I did say to you that I prefer to work on stuff like this. And this is exactly why. Look at that. That paper's started to buckle. And this is another thing to learn about. So if I'm going to go about a painting that I know I'm going to introduce a lot of water, let's say, I wouldn't use this paper, because after a while, look at this. You know, if I wear and tear it a little while, it starts to like really get affected and it will not recover. I'm only one sort of step away from just tearing. Not a very hardy surface. So you could probably paint watercolor on there and then it would sort of dry and recover. But this kind of surface is much more suited to maybe a drawing or a charcoal kind of surface. You can take a bit of water, but not much. So maybe if you were going to just use your acrylic, but not use much water with it, it would be okay. It wouldn't buckle. Like you can see up there where the acrylic is pretty dry. But where I've saturated it, my paper's really started to strain because it just can't absorb it all. That's where my trusty cardboard canvas comes in. You can put water on this thing. You can make it wet, dry, wet, dry. It's got a bit of texture, which I enjoy. See, the ridges. You might not like that. You might be all sort of uptight about it. But for me, I kind of like to introduce things that are in parts out of my control with my work. I control the uncontrollable, if that makes sense. I like to invite chance and a bit of chaos into my work. And one of the ways of doing that is by using a more of an interesting surface, which I find in this nice textured cardboard. Now the other thing I was going to show you is I've used heaps of brushes. What if we weren't going to use a brush? What if we wanted to use something totally different, like a sponge? So I'm going to dip my sponge in. Remember I told you, you've got to find out what stuff does. You want to find out how stuff reacts when you wet it, when it dries, when you use it with different kinds of things other than brushes. Sponges, this is just a household sponge. I've just cut it. Now, I don't know about you, but this is starting to build up to be a bit of an interesting ensemble of marks. So I may not be painting anything in particular, but there's already emotion, there's already atmosphere, there's already something going on due to the fact I have applied a dozen different applications with my mediums. I've used all different things, just like if you were to look out the window at your environment. There's sky, water, greenery, roads, whatever, all different kind of textures. As far as I'm concerned, if we can also bring that kind of variation and repertoire to our painting or to our work, then we are going to come up with more interesting work. Now, straight away, while I've got a wet surface, when you've got a wet surface, you kind of have a bit of an opportunity. And I'm going to actually add a bit more wet, right? Now, like I said, remember, you couldn't do this to a surface, or you wouldn't necessarily do this to a surface like this paper. It's not going to handle it. But see how nicely this is handling it, this cardboard that I painted with some acrylic house paint. It's going the distance, right? It's holding the water above, and it's not warping, and it's not letting it mess it up, basically. Now, on that wet, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what happens when I touch like a little bit of watercolor on there. It doesn't look like a Vincent van Gogh, I know, but can you see how it behaves? It does things. When I move it, it makes it run. These are things that you can add to your repertoire of how to get an effect. Painting is not only you being all controlled and going dot, dot, dot. Knowing your medium, you can do 1,000 different things. You can either make a mark with a collection of 100 tiny dots, which is really boring, or you can make a mark with something that is way more interesting, that might not even have a paintbrush involved, if that makes sense. There's even like another stage to this. Okay, so let's say this is when you really know your medium, right? I know that because I've put that paint there, it's already started to dry somewhat. So if I took a rag, this wouldn't happen if I did it straight away, but if I take a rag now and I take away the parts that is still wet, I know, because I know my medium, I know how it behaves. I know that some of it, like the ghost of it, is going to remain, and in a really interesting way. Same with this red. I could leave it for a bit longer, But just for interest, because I don't even know what's going to happen, let's do the same. Or, yeah, let's just like try and dab it. I don't want to lose what happened. I just want to take away a bit of what's on there and see what is left behind. Okay, it's almost like it's got like a print effect. It might not look like it's going to change the world for you, but trust me when I say you need an extensive repertoire to make interesting work. Now, I like the way that this looks. I'm going to let this dry. And even though I told you that this is just our experiment sheet, which it is, because I have shown you a whole different lot of effects, I'm still going to work this and I'm going to incorporate it and make it interesting. I just also want to show you, see how I ran that brush of yellow over that old paint from before? See the nice effect over the charcoal? So it's like there's a dry part of the canvas, and then where the water, it's like made a beautiful watermark. Just things like that you might incorporate into your paintings that might be very figurative, but these are just techniques of mark making. We're not at the figurative stage yet. We just want to learn the letters and the words, how to put together sentences, if that makes sense. You could do this, you could experiment with medium for a week straight and still not know all the idiosyncrasies between adding water, not adding water, changing your brushes, using different things like sponges, and also considering whether something's wet, drying or dry, and then doing stuff to it. So there's all these different dimensions, different aspects and different points that you can, I guess, control, differentiating characteristics that you control about your medium that are going to have a really dramatic effect. See, when this is dry, or let's just say right now, it's not going to be perfectly dry, but just to illustrate what I'm talking about, right? What will I get? I'm just going to get it's not the most wonderful of shapes, but it will do, just because it's a form made by a human, which makes it interesting. And I'm going to hold it there, and then I'm going to spray paint over it. Deliberately from one angle, so the paint doesn't go everywhere. Now, I'm going to take it away. Okay, now I have something else going on. Something that allowed some of the background to stay, some of the background to be lost in the spray paint. Once again, this is just another interesting way to see how you can make effective marks and effective illusions, because essentially painting is an illusion. That's actually all it is. More effects. Now, what happens? My spray paint's still wet. I'm going to keep pushing this. I want to learn as much as I can what happens when I touch this stuff. I think this spray paint might be an oil base, but I don't know. It's not too stinky. Now I know what it looks like when I wipe it. I get an effect to the background. Again, I'm not trying to make a painting here. I'm not trying to make an image. I'm trying to see how just exciting, how far I can take my mark making and what happens when I do. Yeah, that spray paint has definitely got oil in it, because it's kind of, you can see when you put water on it, it kind of beads, but that's okay. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to use that as like an interesting characteristic. It's not going to slow me down or put me off. As I told you, we're not attached to this. We are just learning how to make cool effects. Now I'm just got a rag dipped in water. I'm just going to mess around here, okay? This is how I do it. I'm just going to let you watch me do exactly what I'm talking about. See that nice hardiness of that cardboard? Look, I can rely upon it. I can throw water on it even. See how I'm not concerned and I'm not uptight? I'm not being finicky, and because of that, look at the freedom. I'm bringing in something that looks quite wild. It almost looks like the natural world. It's so wild, and that's what I like in art. I like it in music too, but today we're talking about art. So you might go, oh, what is this? This looks like a kid's painting. Well, you might think that, but I've learned a whole different thing. I've learned a whole lot of different things just with how my beautiful mediums have behaved when I've done different things to them. And then it just doesn't stop here, right? Because when this dries, it's going to do something else. It's going to look even different again, and I'm going to see things, and I'm going to look at it. I will study it like a monk, and I will observe again. Oh, that did that, and that did that. Like, look how nicely. Let's make it run. Another thing. I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to let it run. I'm doing two things. I'm controlling the situation. I'm controlling certain things, like making sure it is on my canvas. I'm choosing the direction to spin it. I've chosen to add water. I know when I'm going to leave it and when I'm not, all those things. So there's certain controlled things, but also I'm opening the door to a huge amount of chance and things that I couldn't control or I couldn't do if I wanted to. Like, I couldn't paint those drips if I tried to, you know, like, I mean, I could, but they wouldn't look half as cool. But by doing it this way, I invite in mystery, and I invite in chance and what I think is beauty. So there you go, everybody. I hope you feel inspired to do a little bit of experimentation yourself, because like I said, as far as I'm concerned, until you know how to play with your mediums a bit, until you know your own array and a bit more of a detailed, like, understanding of what stuff can do, you don't know enough, really. And things can get way more dimensional. Your ability to make illusions and treat surfaces and make things appear and pop and bounce out of the surface, it can get so much more exciting if you're prepared to apply yourself to this process that I'm going through today.